Welcome to the deep dive. If you've been tracking the news from South Asia lately, the rhetoric has suddenly gotten incredibly sharp, really high stakes.
Yeah.
We're hearing Pakistan's defense minister, Khawaja Mohammad Asif, make this, frankly, extraordinary claim that Pakistan is now prepared for a two-front war.
And that phrase, well, it should make everyone pause, shouldn't it? Because
Right.
for decades, when Pakistan talked about two fronts, it was always India to the east and maybe internal issues.
Right.
Now he's explicitly saying east and west, pointing directly at Afghanistan. Well, it's not subtle at all.
No.
It signals a massive geopolitical shift. I mean, a complete reversal. That old patron-client thing between Islamabad and the Afghan Taliban, it seems to have totally collapsed into, well, open conflict.
Okay, so that's the headline shocker. Our mission today is to, get behind that rhetoric. We've got a pile of sources here looking at how this conflict escalated so fast. We need to figure out how we went from, a 130-year-old colonial border dispute to actual military clashes and shelling in late 2025. It feels very immediate, very volatile.
It is, and to really get it, you actually have to go back those 130 years. It's fascinating, really, how today's fighting connects directly back to a line drawn on a map in 1893.
Okay, let's start right there then. The genesis of it all. The Durand Line. Who actually drew it, and what was the big idea back then?
So it was 1893, you had Sir Henry Mortimer Durand representing British India, and on the other side, Amir Abdurrahman Khan of Afghanistan.
Okay.
And their goal, well, it was purely colonial geopolitics, define who controls what, spheres of influence, and critically, create a buffer zone against the Russians pushing south into Central Asia.
Ah, the great game hangover.
Exactly. It was all about managing imperial rivalry drawn completely on a map without much thought for the people living there.
A line for empires, not for people. Which ignored the local reality, I imagine.
Completely. And that's the core issue, the tragedy, really. The line just sliced right across traditional Pashtun tribal lands, cut families, communities in two.
Wow.
So when Pakistan inherited that border in 1947, Afghanistan pretty much immediately said, no, we don't recognize this. Their argument, then and now, is that the 1893 deal was forced on them under colonial pressure.
So not legally valid once the British left.
That's their stance. And this refusal, this fundamental disagreement over the line's legitimacy, it's been the root cause of mistrust ever since. It's where the whole idea of Pashtunistan comes from, this notion of a unified Pashtun homeland.
Right. But Pakistan obviously sees it differently. They stick to this international law principle, uti possidetis juris.
Yes, uti possidetis juris, and that's a really crucial point.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It basically means, as you possess under law, so shall you possess upon independence. You inherit the colonial boundaries you had. For Pakistan, questioning the Durand Line is incredibly dangerous, because if that line is questionable, what about their other borders? Many of them are also colonial inheritances.
So it's not just about Afghanistan. Challenging this line could unravel the whole state structure, potentially.
Potentially, yes. It feels existential for Islamabad, which is why they hold so firm.
Okay, that clarifies why it's more than just a line on a map. It's deeply symbolic, legally vital for Pakistan. But it brings us straight to the human cost, doesn't it? The people literally divided by this.
Absolutely. The Pashtuns. They're the main group split by this border. We're talking roughly half of Afghanistan's population, maybe 15% of Pakistan's.
Huge numbers.
Huge. And these are people with deep ties, family, culture, tribes stretching across that border. Imagine whole clans, marketplaces suddenly finding themselves in different countries overnight, dealing with this politically charged boundary.
And they live right along it, in places like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan, eastern Afghanistan. So when tensions flare up between Kabul and Islamabad,
they're the ones caught in the middle. Always. Especially communities in what used to be FATA, the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan. They're constantly dealing with military operations, militant activity, the fallout.
And that instability must create huge disruption. Refugees, displaced people.
Massive disruption. You see significant refugee flows going both ways, depending on who's fighting whom and where. Lots of internally displaced people, IDPs on both sides too. It really underscores that this isn't just state versus state. It's rooted in this forced division of a people.
Such a painful legacy. And that instability, that cross-border reality, leads us right into the modern era and the whole issue of proxy groups. Pakistan for years saw the Afghan Taliban as a kind of strategic asset, right?
That was the term, yes. Strategic depth or strategic asset.
Yeah.
The idea was to have a friendly regime in Kabul, one not aligned with India, basically securing Pakistan's western flank and tribal areas.
But that calculation seems to have, Backfired spectacularly.
Spectacularly is the word, because that reliance, that support for the Afghan Taliban ultimately helped create the very group Pakistan is now fighting tooth and nail. The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP.
The Pakistani Taliban. Okay, break that down. How did the TTP emerge and how are they distinct from the Afghan Taliban, even if they share the name and ideology?
Right, so the TTP really coalesced around 2007. It's an umbrella group of various militant factions, and crucially, it was fueled directly by anger over Pakistani military operations in those Pashtun tribal areas we just talked about.
So a reaction to Pakistan's own actions.
Largely, yes. And their main goal is different from the Afghan Taliban's. The TTP wants to overthrow the Pakistani state and impose their version of Sharia law in Pakistan. They see the Pakistani government as illegitimate, un-Islamic.
Whereas the Afghan Taliban's focus has always been on controlling Afghanistan itself.
Exactly. But the TTP uses Afghanistan as a sanctuary. They slip back and forth across that porous border, often relying on those shared ethnic and ideological ties with groups inside Afghanistan.
And that's the flashpoint now, the cross-border sanctuary.
That's the absolute core of the recent escalation. Pakistan keeps accusing the Afghan Taliban government in Kabul of, well, either actively helping the TTP or at least turning a blind eye, letting them operate freely.
And Kabul denies this.
Kabul denies it. They usually call it an internal Pakistani problem. But the fact remains, even after taking power in 2021, the Afghan Taliban haven't really cracked down on the TTP in a way that satisfies Islamabad. And that failure, that perceived tolerance, is what seems to have finally broken the relationship. Patronage turned into hostility.
Okay, so we have the deep historical wound of the Durand Line, the division of the Pashtuns, that's the groundwork, and then the TTP, operating from Afghanistan, is the immediate trigger for conflict.
That's a good summary.
So let's get to the boiling point. Walk us through the sequence of events in late 2025 that turned this sort of shadow conflict into open fighting.
It seems the main trigger was a TTP ambush. Sometime in October 2025, they attacked Pakistani soldiers near the border, reportedly killing 11. Pakistan's reaction was swift and pretty unprecedented in its reach. Reports came out about a series of airstrikes, apparently hitting targets deep inside Afghanistan. Some sources even mentioned strikes near the capital, Kabul.
Wow, near Kabul. That's a major escalation. Were they targeting specific people?
Yes. Reports indicated the strikes were aimed squarely at TTP leadership. The main target was supposedly the TTP chief, Noor Wali Masood, though it seems he survived the attempt.
But hitting near Kabul must have reacted furiously.
Oh, absolutely. Condemnation was immediate. They called it a massive violation of sovereignty and pretty quickly vowed retaliation.
And did they follow through?
They did, and fast. Within just a few days, Afghan Taliban forces launched coordinated attacks back across the border. They hit Pakistani posts in several key sectors, places like Helmand, Kunar, using artillery, infantry. Early reports suggested they even overran some positions initially.
And the fighting itself, what did it look like? We heard about captured U.S. equipment being used.
Yeah, that's a fascinating and worrying detail from the sources. The Afghan forces seem to be using a mix, older gear, sure, but also some of that U.S.-made weaponry left behind, alongside their usual technicals, the pickup trucks with guns mounted on them.
Does having that U.S. gear actually change things? Does it make them a more formidable opponent for the Pakistani military?
It definitely seems to enhance their capabilities. It's not just AK-47s anymore. We're talking potentially better night vision, maybe more reliable communications, maybe even things like captured artillery pieces or armored vehicles. It doesn't give them parity with Pakistan's conventional military, not by a long shot.
Right.
But it does mean they can conduct more sophisticated, more coordinated attacks than perhaps before. It likely raises the potential casualty count and makes them a more challenging force to deal with right at the border. It moves them a step beyond just being an insurgency.
Right. And the immediate aftermath was pretty grim. Border closures, high casualties.
Very grim. Key crossings like Torkham and Shaman, vital for trade and movement, were shut down. And the casualty figures were stark, though. As always in these situations, highly disputed.
What were the claims?
Afghanistan claimed they killed nearly 60 Pakistani soldiers. Pakistan claimed they killed over 200 Afghan fighters. The real numbers are probably somewhere in between, and hard to verify.
But the message was clear.
Undeniably, this wasn't just proxy skirmishing anymore. This was direct state-on-state military conflict with significant bloodshed. And that, of course, sets off alarm bells across the entire region.
Which brings us to the wider view, the global chessboard. Let's zoom out for a second, because That defense minister talking about a two-front war. Could there be a domestic angle to that as well?
Oh, almost certainly. That's a really important piece. Pakistan's facing, a really tough economic situation at home, serious inflation, energy problems, general public discontent. So, playing up an external threat, framing it as this high-stakes, two-front struggle, that's a classic move, isn't it? Governments everywhere do it sometimes to try and rally support, distract from problems at home.
Right, unify against the external enemy. Meanwhile, the neighbors are definitely paying attention. India, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
How do they see this?
Well, India, as Pakistan's long-standing rival, likely sees, well, maybe not an opportunity exactly, but a situation that keeps Pakistan preoccupied on its western border. We've seen India making diplomatic overtures to the Afghan Taliban. There was that Afghan foreign minister visit recently.
Which Pakistan must hate.
Oh, they see it as a major strategic threat. They worry about being encircled or boxed in. India, for its part, talks about supporting Afghan sovereignty and, criticizes Pakistan's alleged links to terrorism. It's the usual dynamic, but intensified now.
And what about other key players? China?
China's reaction is crucial. They are urging calm, advocating strongly for peace and stability.
SUPAC.
Exactly. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, billions invested. They need regional stability to protect those massive trade and infrastructure projects. A shooting war on the Afghan-Pakistan border is terrible news for CPEC, terrible news for their Belt and Road ambitions. It means instability, security costs, disrupted supply lines. China wants quiet.
Makes sense. And we're also hearing from the U.S., Russia, the Gulf states.
Yes, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they're all involved, urging restraint, calling for dialogue. Saudi Arabia even has a recent defense pact with Pakistan, adding another layer. But the message from basically everyone, the U.S., Russia, the regional powers, is the same: de-escalate.
Because nobody wants this spiraling.
Nobody wants a full-blown war between these two, especially in a region with nuclear weapons nearby. The risks are just far too high for everyone.
Okay, so that leads us to the final critical question. What about de-escalation? Are there any realistic ways out of this? What are the prospects for peace?
Well, the immediate talk is always about, tactical steps. Negotiating ceasefires, though, we've seen those can be fragile, quickly broken. Getting diplomats talking is key, maybe with mediation from Beijing or Riyadh or Doha. Someone both sides might trust enough to facilitate without them losing face.
And maybe reopening those border crossings.
That's a crucial confidence-building measure. Reopening Torkham and Shaman would ease the economic pain for local people, maybe lower the temperature slightly.
But those all sound like temporary fixes, like putting a bandage on a deep wound. The sources seem to point to really fundamental problems blocking any kind of lasting peace.
They do. There are at least three major hurdles. First, just the sheer weight of history. That deep, profound mistrust between Kabul and Islamabad, constantly fueled by the unresolved Durand Line issue. It's a psychological barrier as much as a political one.
Always there in the background. Always. Second is the TTP itself. They aren't some monolithic group easy to control. They're quite decentralized, operating in smaller cells. So even if the Afghan Taliban leadership wanted to completely shut them down, actually verifying that, making it stick across the board, is incredibly difficult.
Right. Hard to guarantee results.
Yeah.
And the third challenge. It seems to be internal for the Afghan Taliban.
It is. If they crack down too hard on the TTP, they risk alienating parts of their own base.
How so?
Because many Taliban fighters and even some commanders share that same hardline ideology, that same Pashtun identity with the TTP members. A really aggressive crackdown could cause splits within the Taliban ranks, maybe even defections. It could undermine the very regime Pakistan, ironically, spent decades trying to help put in place.
What a tangled web. So the warning seems pretty clear. If they don't find some kind of political off-ramp, this could easily settle into a long, grinding border war.
Exactly. Which would be devastating for trade, devastating for the communities caught in the crossfire, and just keep the entire region unstable.
So wrapping this deep dive up, it really feels like a story rooted in that colonial past, in ethnic identity. But the current fire is absolutely being fueled by this proxy strategy that just completely backfired.
I think that's right. The attempt to use proxies, the refusal to really grapple with the border's legacy, it's all culminated in this dangerous confrontation.
Yeah, it's a powerful paradox, isn't it? Pakistan spends decades cultivating the Afghan Taliban as a strategic counterweight, a strategic asset, only for that relationship to completely implode, empower the TTP, and lead to direct conflict with their former allies. The whole strategy just flipped on its head.
History coming full circle in a very dangerous way.
It really has. Which leaves us and you with maybe a final thought to consider. When a state, even a powerful one, relies on backing insurgent groups across its borders to achieve its strategic aims, can it ever truly control the outcome? Or does it inevitably risk creating a monster that turns back on its creator? This whole situation, the failure of Pakistan's long game in Afghanistan, what does it really tell us about the inherent risk, the ultimate viability of using proxy warfare in the modern world? Something to think about.